Trent, can I take this time at the beginning of the meeting to recruit for the California YSN?
Heck yeah.
We need people.
Yeah.
We
End of
need
story.
preferably people who are newish to the industry on the younger side, but really just anybody who cares.
Passionate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm old enough that if I joined, I'd help like 3 or 4 of them.
We're gonna have virtual meetings, I don't care if you're in California or not. We just need people to sign up on the website, caysn.org. And more the merrier. We want California, the fourth largest economy in the world, to have some sort of support system for young surveyors.
It'll happen. It'll happen.
Someday.
That's right.
Good to see you, Kyle.
Yeah. It's good stuff. I think we were normal 406-ish. We got to 25. So I was hoping we'd at least get like 30-ish, but I know there's some good I see some recognizable names that all have their cameras off as well. So there's some good people in here to get some really good input.
There we go.
So outside of just our normal conversation, our quote unquote panelists that we try to put together, but I know there's some other names in here that has some direct relationships with the education system as well. So it's good stuff. We kind of changed the roundtable format earlier this year, and we were trying to really help those sole proprietors and younger surveyors that kind of just went recently out on their own. And so we had a few problems where we would have, survey related type boundary issues and try to get a whole community around a boundary resolution. And that part's been slow to grow. So Jerry and Kyle kind of wanted to change the format a little bit again. Maybe we'll just kind of bounce around different roundtable topics like this. And then, we'll throw in some boundary related ones. If somebody reaches out and they got boundary issues, we can have them present and go back to the kind of that format. So, but at least to keep the conversation go. There you go. I was going to say, Adrian jumped on there. At least to keep the kind of roundtable format going and grow this format. I do enjoy roundtable conversations. We have them at our Nevada, California conferences, our Western regional conferences as well. So we always have roundtable conversations, and I've always enjoyed those. So this particular one, I don't know if it was Jerry or Kyle that came up with it, but what should basic land surveying education entail? And so they went out and recruited a few panelists. And so we'll let those introduce themselves, that we kind of put the panel together, and then give a little bit of background on that. But I'll start with Kyle, and then we'll go to Jerry. And then, so love it.
You want me to introduce myself?
Sure, senor. Yeah, the recording. We are recording, so yep, it's good to go, Brad. Thanks.
Good.
My name is Kyle Brook. I'm a licensed land surveyor in the state of California. I'm a relatively young person, and I'm pretty passionate and pretty outspoken about supporting younger surveyors and getting people ready to take their tests for licensure, etc. So I run Confluence Land Surveying, which provides test prep material for people, trying to get more people into the industry. I'm now the state coordinator for the California Young Surveyors Network, which we're trying to drum up and turn into something that can support younger surveyors. So trying to work to connect young people with this industry, and it's not an easy thing to do, but that's what I'm passionate about.
Love it. Jerry, you want to go next?
Yeah, my name's Jerry Mahun. I'm at the other end of the spectrum from the older guys here. I started teaching surveying back in 1979, long time ago. And I've wound up taught at UW-Platteville, Penn State, Purdue, Madison Area Technical College, and University of Wisconsin-Platteville twice. And then after, there were a couple of retirements in there. And then I wound up working for NLC Prep, working on their FS and PS exam prep courses So I've taught the environments that I've taught in our civil engineering programs with surveying classes, the traditional ones back at the beginning. And then in the civil engineering program, I finished up the UAB Plateau with in the civil engineering program with a single surveying class left. I was supposed to meet all of civil engineer needs. In between, I taught in surveying programs. So I've kind of had different exposures to surveying and education for different purposes. And then also working with the NLC prep stuff, working with students nationwide, coming out of different educational programs with different backgrounds, and the struggles that they were having with some of the material in the review courses, as well as the struggles with the NCEES exams and that type of thing. So that kind of got us to thinking about surveying education and also a larger picture of what's on the licensing exams and how well do they reflect what really should be the knowledge set that the student needs for when they enter the profession. So, but anyway, I could go on all night, but that's basically where I'm coming from.
You're muted, Kent. Trent.
You're muted. There you
Yeah, I
go.
know. I was gonna say, Daniel, you want to go next? Love it.
Oh, Dan Rodman.
Oh yeah, sorry, Dan.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, sure.
Daniel.
Yeah, Dan Rodman. Yeah, I came out of the UW-Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison back when they had a survey program in their civil engineering department in the mid 90s. And I was a surveyor. I taught there because they kind of ran out of faculty because the civil engineering, departments are all stretched to, in so many different directions. So I was a lecturer there for a couple of years. And then mostly I worked for the city here as a surveyor for the Parks Division. And it was a nice mix of boundary problems and coordinate system, datum adjustments, sort of. I was more of a land title company than anything else toward the end. And now I have Jerry's old job teaching at the Madison Area Technical College.
Good stuff. Brian?
Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Brian Gillooly. I've been surveying since 2000, so about 25 years. I didn't go through traditional survey education. I went to school for mechanical engineering and ended up falling into surveying like a lot of us have. I'm licensed in Washington, Oregon, and California, and I got licensed originally in 2008. I am the business development leader at DEA, and I also run WashingtonSurveyor.com. I've been doing that since about 2004. But I just recently relocated down to California. But before that, most of my surveying career was up in Washington State in the Seattle area. Because I kind of fell into survey, and I'm big on mentorship and understand the importance of it and how that drives education, and just the importance of mentorship in general, and just learning by on-the-job training. And I have a lot of experience in the field and office and doing both. So even to modern day. So it's just, I love surveying, and I love helping people get progression in their career.
Exactly. Yeah, that's awesome. How about Jonathan? Where'd you go? There you are.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Haas. I own a technical writing company in Colorado. I stumbled upon this group by one of my clients. I have a background in education. I taught for almost 20 years, and I now work with companies to develop standard operating procedures that are then turned into onboarding for new employees and interns. And working with one of my civil engineering clients, this topic of the lack of surveyors now and in the future, the statistics, if things don't change, look pretty dire in the next 10, 15 years in this career. So my passion is connecting young people with good paying jobs that that are in high demand. And honestly, when I found out that surveying was one of those jobs, I was honestly a little bit shocked. I'm like, this job seems super cool. Get outside, do some things. So in my perspective, I just feel like it's a matter of how we can introduce this career to high school students before other tech related careers kind of get their hooks on them. So that is what I am currently working on. I am writing a curriculum now based on just kind of an introduction to surveying. We're working on finding some partnerships with local universities, and I met with a school district today to discuss how we can possibly find some mentor and internship opportunities for our high school kids here in the career survey.
Not to mess up the flow of the introductions, but we'll have to have a chat offline, Jonathan, more about that kind of stuff, getting surveying into the high school curriculum, that kind of stuff. It's happening in different parts of the country. So the last one before myself, obviously I'll just do myself last, but we love to have the wisdom of Mr. Knud. So you want kind of a short background, Knud?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Trent. I'm like Jerry. I've been a licensed surveyor for over half a century. I got into surveying in the Marine Corps, and I went through the University of Wisconsin surveying program back when it was still going. I also have a law degree and practiced law. I've been teaching at the University of Maine in the surveying program for over 30 years now, but I've also taught at Florida Atlantic University, Florida University, Penn State, and just a little bit about the program. The University of Maine surveying program has over 400 students.
Wow.
Yeah, it goes everywhere from bachelor's up to a doctorate now. So, and every one of them's online. So,
Exactly.
all right, that's enough about me.
I think everybody should know. If you don't know Knud, please Google him, because he's an amazing talent to have as part of our panelists as well. He's got so much education background. So, and then I kind of was playing moderator / panelist as well. And of course, my name is Trent Keenan. I come to this as a total school of hard knocks, no degree whatsoever. I'll chime in more maybe from a business owner on what we would like, new graduates to be able to understand when they come on as a new hire and certain things like that. That's maybe what I feel comfortable on chiming in on, but I am a high school educated, school of hard knocks. I've been in the profession. I started when I was 19 years old. From there, I've been licensed for over 20 years, licensed in 6 Western states, CFEDs, all that kind of good stuff. I'm apparently good at taking exams. So that part is comes through on that aspect of it. But I enjoy, like Brian, it's the mentorship part aspect of it, training kind of the next generation as well. There is so much to this, and that we've lost that mentorship over the last probably 15-20 years, and so bringing that back as well, and kind of just adding to those aspects of the roundtable. So those would be what I kind of chime in on. So I don't know. Kyle kind of put the framework together for this, and I don't know if you want to run a little bit of the next framework there. I kind of laughed at the icebreaker, so Kyle put some icebreaker questions in here, and so I really wouldn't be one to say, but what's one thing as an icebreaker is what's one thing you've learned on the job that you wish you had as part of a formal education? So that was as a panelist who wants to kind of chime in on that one. I don't have the formal education. I have the on-the-job training, so it makes it hard for me to answer that question.
Business management.
Yeah. What was that?
And I have something real short.
Go for it.
One of the things I wish I'd known is saving for retirement, 401k and stuff. As most of you know, $1,000 when you're 22 is worth $20,000 when you're 60.
Yeah.
Okay, enough for me.
Yeah, so that'd go back to the business, right? Business, and kind of that was like a home ec, right? When I was in high school, we had the home ec classes, and still I didn't really they still didn't fill you in on that kind of stuff.
I agree with Knud on that because the only really financial type of courses that they get in a program is like an econ course, which is generally one of the required humanities courses and that type of thing. And a lot of people wind up going out and starting their own businesses and that, and they really don't know where to start. And that's tied into money management in general, because a lot of people, I see all these kids that I had to teach over all the years, they had no idea what things cost or what a good salary was and what they were actually what they actually had the cost to live and that type of thing. That's why I was always of the opinion that coming out of high school, you should work for McDonald's for a year and try to live on that before you decided what you want to do for a career and that type of thing. But I agree. Anything money management wise, source management, I think is a critical thing that we need to incorporate into the program.
Yeah, and we've had tons of conversations. Just Kyle threw in there business management, same business management, personal finances, right? I mean, all of that kind of rolls into a lot of that. But Brian, anything? So mechanical engineering, what didn't you learn that you wish you learned?
Well, I think this, really just how to deal with people and how to deal with, problematic people that might be above you and be blocking your progression. I think that side of things is what I didn't pick up on. I learned the basics, of angles and distances and baselines and all that good stuff. But when it comes to dealing with people, that's the hard part.
Yeah, that is, conflict resolution, that kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Jason just lured through in the chat. Jeff Bezos worked for McDonald's as a teenager. So to Jerry's point, that's awesome. I love that. And let's see. The next one, let's see, another one. What feedback have you received from employers concerning necessary base skills? So we'll kind of go around the horn on I guess who's on the kind of working side, but feedback and Corey Allred's on here as well, and he's Parkland College, and so feel free to chime in as well, Corey, anytime you want to kind of unmute yourself. But I know you got some practical experience on this as well, so I wanted to throw you out there. But go for it, Kyle.
So I'm currently shopping around trying to find a employer, and so it's been interesting because I've done this a couple times now. Obviously, after starting out entry level, they're looking for somebody who can work hard. After that, they start to ask you about, hey, what sort of software do you know? What equipment have you worked with? And then once you get your licenses, it stops to be about that. They say, oh, well, you can learn that. We need somebody who can understand the fundamentals. And so it's been interesting to see it kind of go back to being about finding a hard worker after a middle period where people were wondering whether or not you could run a instrument or a field crew or any of those things. Now people say, oh, you don't know how to work with TBC. We can train you that. We can train you in that. It's more about this, understanding the fundamentals.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Trent, I'll chime in. At the University of Maine, and I think at other universities, you send out a questionnaire to graduates and employers, and so I've looked at probably over 1,000 of them, and I know this might surprise, but the employers want written communication skills.
Yeah.
We're training them to be leaders in the profession, and so how to go to public meetings, sell projects, communicate with their peers, with clients, with neighbors, with attorneys. And also, this is, again, another strange one, but like road safety knowledge that you just don't think about when you're teaching. But a lot of those employers want their employees to come back alive, and safety is a big thing. So I'll just stop at that and let others chime in.
So yeah, go for it, Jerry. I was going to go look for something while you're chatting, Jerry.
Yeah, things have on the software side of things have settled down a bit. with respect to what are the major packages that are used in major hardware and that type of stuff. But years ago, we used to struggle with what CAD platform to adopt and that type of thing, because it was using MicroStation, everybody else was using something AutoCAD based and that type of thing. And it got to the point where we reached the realization, and we kind of got this from feedback from the employers and that type of thing. That ties in with some of the stuff that Knud was talking about. Was software is a training thing. What we're in a job of was, our job was education. We were supposed to educate people, not anybody can be trained to use any type of software. They need to know the concepts. And the analogy I always used was word processing. It doesn't matter which word processor you're proficient in. If you can't put a sentence together, then the software is not going to solve that problem for you. If you don't have the knowledge of how to compose, sentences or paragraphs, that's where we were supposed to be. We were supposed to be doing that. And that ties back to the communication. They want students that can communicate. The first thing that an employer would ask us if we were a reference for the student was, what are the student's work habits? How well did he work with other people? Did he get his work in on time? They didn't say, did he get A's and B's, or did he ace the exams and stuff like that? They want to know about the character of the person and how they could use that and integrate that into the people that they already had. As far as software goes, we can train them on anything, but they got to know the basic concepts. So it's always been a struggle to find the distinction between training and educating. And I can't remember who from the BLM told me this, cleared it up for me this way, but stuck with me for 30 years. Do you want your daughter educated about sex or trained in sex? That kind of drove it home as to what the difference between the two was, So we're staying on the education side of things.
Yeah, it is a great analogy, though, right? Especially when you think about you don't want to think of the visual aspect of it, but when you think about it, you're like, yeah, that makes total sense. That is crazy. Brian,
I'll
go
oh
for it,
yeah,
Dan. Go for it, Dan.
Yeah, I'll just pitch in. Realistically, I mean, we teach a 2-year associate's degree, so things like communication, they take an English class and then a technical communication class. So it's great, that employers are always saying, oh, we need better communicators. Well, they get classes in that, and the few classes I get with them for surveying, I've got a hammer on surveying. And it's nice to know about retirement and compounding interest, and I show them that once in career development. And safety too. We talk, we spend a day talking about safety, but if you talk about something one time, it's not maybe gonna stick, maybe not.
Yeah.
So we need to be realistic about what the core education is in our specialty. And communication, frankly, is secondary. And I don't want to say so much to say safety is secondary, but you can't emphasize everything, right? It's a limited time. There's a ton of knowledge. If you stick your head in a textbook, in a 2-year degree, you just get completely lost. I find that I just need to hammer over and over on some fundamentals, coordinate geometry, what does a level do? What does a total station do? What does GPS do? What do you kind of put them together and sticking? And, Civil 3D, we teach them a ton of Civil 3D, but like Jerry was saying, I try to teach it in a way to be skeptical of the results. Be careful. Like, did the thing convert your foot on you? And here are 7 ways that it might do it, and so that kind of thing. But yeah, so I'm realistic about what I need to cover. And if they don't come out of my program, with great, written answers to their questions, what really matters is they can produce accurate surveys and plug in and have the technical knowledge.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Go for it, Jason.
Yeah, I got an interesting perspective because I got into this later in the game. I'm not as old as Jerry, but I'm working my way up there. Hopefully I get to that point someday. I came at this from a secondary career perspective. And for me, I got into GIS. I know boo hiss, but because I had a computer background, I found that this is where I wanted to be after doing geophysics for a while. And I think that it seems like the shift of dumping all of the responsibility into the educational system of the mentorship is where this disconnect is starting to occur, because what you just described, Dan, you can't teach people that in a school, in a class. You have to actually have some time on target, meaning several months, even years, to get that exposure. And you can't do it in a semester. It's just not, it's an impossible task. And I've seen it from the classes I've taken at New Mexico State and also at the junior colleges here. And then the people that taught me the most stuff were the old farts that didn't want to ever get a license. And I learned so much from them. I was lucky I was able to get in front of them for a few years, and that made a huge difference. But I think the problem is that the shift from mentorship to education left a lot of people in the position that you're talking about. And it sounds frustrating because you can't get enough time to give them and imbue that knowledge to them in a way that's manifesting success in the future. Just a checkbox and a grade. And that doesn't mean they learned anything. They just got the checkbox and the grade.
So I think, I think it definitely is a failure in just the mentorship side of that. We are like failing as a whole. We're producing a lot of people that are really great at doing one thing, and we need to break that mold and start thinking logically, how are we going to best help people get progression in their careers. And it comes to, like, I love this topic because as a hiring manager, we see, quite often, there's gaps in knowledge. There's always gonna be gaps in knowledge, but do you understand the basics? Do you understand what a coordinate even is? Things like that. And that's why I think that this is a good conversation to have. And, I think that all of it should end up resulting in great mentorship and us leading the pathway. But yeah, so as far as this conversation is concerned, we have, basics in education that would definitely help. If I had somebody new out of school that had this knowledge, I could mold them and help them, guide them to the next stage and help them progress. But what I'm seeing is just a lot of people coming in looking for looking for jobs that have just been years of doing one element of what we do, and that's what they knew surveying to be. That's like we have a lot of work to do, for sure.
Yeah, we one of the things we're doing at my company is we do training every other or one Friday a month, and it's just specifically for uplifting everybody. And obviously we're closed every other Friday, so the one Friday a month we're doing nothing but upskilling, and so that's the only way we're going to be able to kind of grow that stuff. The kind of the core question. So as Kyle threw in there, Chat GPT probably wrote these particular questions, right, Kyle? So Kyle put the framework together via AI. So one of the very first questions, we've kind of alluded to it a little bit already, but what foundational skills should every surveyor have upon graduation? I would say upon graduation. You had or licensure, but I would say upon graduation, because back to Brian's point, coming out of college, where are they at that particular point? So who wants to take that one? Who wants to start with that one? So,
well, I'd just say, like, I'd like to see a familiarity with the type of equipment that we use, and just at least have an understanding of what it is and how it's used, and maybe preferably have a little bit of experience, using it, and just having that overall knowledge. I think that would be a great start.
How do we do that when we have multiple manufacturers? I know somebody like Fresno State obviously has an amazing deal with Leica where they swap out things. I know like our local community college is or not community college, but local college, they got a 50% discount from Trimble, right? So how do we, when we have multiple manufacturers, how do we get them proficient in certain
like
hardware?
As far as entry level, I would say I'd say it doesn't really matter as long as they have an understanding on what an instrument does and turns on. I'll teach you how to use something. As long as you know what to ask, the menus, you'll find it in each manufacturer. It's all the same. I've used all the manufacturers, and it's just they're very similar.
Yeah, think about like for example, Leica, and the biggest error in distance measurement is your prism constant. And the idea, if you have Leica, the value of going into depth and saying, here's this prism. I don't know if they still do this, but they had an old prism that was like a -34 prism constant millimeter, but they call it 0. And then so the other ones, you know, now that they aren't really like, there's two answers, right? In like I use Trimble mostly. So going into depth on one manufacturer's stuff on an issue like that is good critical thinking, you know. So you don't need to train across a lot of different brands. You just need to show them that you know they need to take care or they'll screw it up.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Good. Kyle, you had your hand up there for a minute.
Yeah. I think for me, the most foundational skill that I would love to see more of is not, boundary law or CAD or anything of that sort, but just the ability to learn better. And I'm curious what some of our educators, in the chat have experienced. But for me, there's always another thing in surveying that I can learn more about if I can go find the resources to learn about it. And how do we get people to the point where they know how to research well, they know how to read a text and find the information they need within it, and all these different CAD softwares and manufacturers, there's a million options. I need someone who can pick up a manual and read a manual on an instrument they've never used before and be able to, learn something and run. So how do you teach people to teach themselves?
Especially when you have YouTube University, right? Go for it, Jason. Yeah, I love it.
I was going to mention when I worked in Las Cruces, it was a requirement that we had to have CST level 2 for office and field to keep our jobs, just as engineering techs. We didn't get to call ourselves survey techs because they do things differently in Las Cruces, but we had to have that within the first year because if we wanted to keep the job, the surveyor at the time, Scott, required everyone that was going to be in our survey team to be at least that proficient, both in the history of it and then the usage of the instruments. And it makes a baseline of what your knowledge is. Not much different than the FS gives you a baseline of education and skills in math. This was all technical stuff. So we ran level loops, we did all kinds of stuff. And it was kind of a great leveling place because we all had the same level of skills. And if you went farther, you could go farther, but you had to get a license at that point. And that was kind of the starting point, was just you had to have a CST2 office field and then demonstrate that those skills were valid. And I think that a lot of employers have looked towards that recently because it's been pushed pretty heavily. But I think that that's also a starting point to get that knowledge that you're talking about, Kyle, to kind of get an idea of how to learn, because it's a starting point. It's a checkbox, but it's a continuum.
Yeah. And that's what Steve threw in the chat as well, the ability to learn. And I think that's a lot of what the 4-year degree or even, just the education system does, is teach you how to learn and look up things, right? Like, I mean, it's a lot of the classroom environment is such that. So
Right. Or
go for it.
Yeah. I like what Brian was saying, because that's sort of how we view an educator's giving them, so they don't have the deer in the headlight when Brian talks to them like about a topic. And then Brian takes them on and goes them. And so I've sort of grouped it into 5 areas. And one is knowledge consistent with land development, such as elevation certificates, drainage, road designs, construct, stakeout, erosion control, zoning, subdivision regulations, septic systems, water systems. The next grouping is business law, such as contracts, mechanics, liens, employment law, fair labor standards, business taxation, and so on. Then third is legal aspects, boundaries, the United States Public Land Survey System, easements, covenants, riparian boundaries. Fourth area would be least squares, error theory, geodesy, state plane coordinates, remote sensing. And finally, instrument software, total station, GPS, drone, scanner, GIS, CAD. And if they're familiar with, not adept, familiar, and they go to work for Brian or some of the other practitioners, they can then take and develop those areas. Done.
Nice. Yeah, no, that definitely covers most aspects of it for sure.
Yeah, and some of the you just rolled off would be, I wouldn't expect people to have that knowledge as an entry level type of role either. It's just some of that would not be necessary, but it's just the basics of what we care about.
Yeah, I was gonna say some of that comes with on-the-job training, right?
Yeah.
And some of that comes with just experience and, you know, later in life experiences. Steve threw in the chat, and Steve, you have to tell me what EBMUD is, because I forget what the EB is, but
East Bay Mud.
yeah, East Bay. Oh, there you go. Okay. The financial incentives work. And I will say I've had this conversation a few different times during some of my presentations as well, but it was somebody, we offer the CST and we put incentivize it as well for someone taking the CST. There's always a monetary value to it. We would do like $1 raise for everybody who got either Part 107 or CST levels, 1, 2, or 3 or whatever. Somebody was doing that. One of the presentations I did, he was doing those, and he wouldn't get any inform or anybody to take the exams. But then he went to a $1,000 one-time $1,000 bonus for somebody passing the exam, and then a ton of people signed up. Right? Sometimes they see the bigger value as opposed to a $1 raise. They see $1,000 bonus, right? And so Steve kind of threw in there about monthly bonuses as well. So those are so many different ways, so many different mindsets with different people.
So we would hide little codes in the text so that when crew or members read through it and they find that, we give them a bonus. They brought it up to us.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, you did it.
That's cool. I love it. So one of the other ones in there upon graduation as well was, and I think Knud kind of hit on it, but boundary law, field experience. So kind of field experience associated with it, CAD or GIS, and then communications was kind of the last one in there. But go for it. Oops, has to unmute. Go for it, Jerry. I click the wrong button.
To a certain extent, we almost would have to bounce back to down to question number 7.
Yeah.
That type of thing is if we want to look at a dual track type of system with a technical educational track versus a professional educational track, much like we have in engineering, within civil engineers and civil engineering technicians, both are career paths, both have related education, but different emphases on that education. You know, and we could be looking at that type of thing. There's different foundational skills for the professional track than there is for the technician track, simply because the responsibilities are associated with it and that type of thing. So and some of these things that, again, drawing an analogy with respect to civil engineering, there's like 7 different specializations within civil engineering, big ones. And civil engineering students are exposed to all of them in a 4-year degree. But there's no way in hell when they walk out the door that they're going to be proficient in all of those. They specialize in a couple of them. And surveying kind of is similar. When we look at all these different topics and stuff that students are exposed to, yeah, and like Dan said, you got to hammer on stuff to get them. In 2 years, you're not going to expose them and make them experts in everything. But you do have to expose them to those areas so that they know that they exist. And they can start to later on when they're doing their learning and their continuing education and advancing in their careers, they have something to fall back on that gives them a framework on which to add that kind of stuff. You know, you don't want the first time they hear about geodesy to be when, you know, the boss says we're going to buy a new GPS unit, you know, and all this kind of stuff in geodesy. And so what the hell is all that stuff? Never heard of it before. So you almost have the fire hose approach. The fire hose, you know, drinking water out of a fire hose. You almost have to use that to a certain extent in the educational environment. And, you know, let them know there's a lot of this stuff, you know, that you may or may not do in the course of your career. You may never do photogrammetry. You may never do LiDAR. You may never do this, but you gotta know it exists.
Well, that's I like what Madison put in the chat there. You know, working knowledge of went away, of field to finish procedures and just how every piece fits into the overall project, and you know, and most importantly, what do we do, and how does that fit into the overall project when it comes to like having architecture and engineering all involved in a project? What are the pieces that we do, and how does that play in the overall picture of a project?
Yeah. Corey, I think that that kind of teed you up perfectly for the dual track stuff. And I saw you unmute there, but with Parkland having, you know, you still have the technicians aspect on the weekend stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we do.
And then you have a regular degree program as well. So I thought that kind of teed up perfectly for you. So
yeah, I appreciate that. I've been carting kids between practices and whatnot, so just barely hopping on here.
Love it.
Yeah, I put in the chat there. not to go back to it, but I kind of find the opposite, that students now don't know how to find answers for themselves. Unfortunately, I didn't see who posted that. You
Yeah.
know, we sit at a computer, and if I ask a student questions, I get blank stares. They don't know they're at a computer. They can literally hop on Google and find that answer. So it's difficult. So I structure classes where we challenge the students to think for themselves. A lot of it is just repetition and trying to find an answer to anything. It is over and over. I find that if I say something 1, 2, 5 times, they won't get it. 15, 20 times, and maybe they start to pick it up.
Yeah. And I mean, that's almost the marketing thing, right? When you're marketing anything, it takes, eyes of 15, 20 times before that particular marketing aspect is even seen. So that kind of goes with that same point there. But yeah, and Tim had threw in the chat there about thinking the younger generation is kind of dominating on their experience and their knowledge, being able to kind of find those answers faster. But yeah, it's
I find it interesting that students now they're really good at swiping left and right. They suck at technology.
yeah.
And I've had students tell me that themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, that's funny to think, but that was well, and actually, on that same topic, not to kind of mess up the flow, but we've had these conversations where the students are only learning on, say, the little iPads or Google kind of Google laptop types things, right? Like they've never had a dual monitor situation, or if they've never had a tower, basic computer towers and those kind of things, and so those things are somewhat unfamiliar to them when you sit them down in front of a CAD station. So those are some things that we've kind of talked about in other different roundtables as well, because they've only dealt with a little laptop. They don't even know what a regular CAD machine environment looks like. So something to think about there too. Kyle threw in the chat, how do we get surveying topics, not just geometry, in front of potential entry level people, high school students, and that sooner? It's being worked on. So there's a couple of different programs. Texas has a great program going on where their kids are graduating with an associate's in GIS, a Part 107, CST level 1. It takes a lot of industry support. It takes all of us to volunteer on Fridays to go into the classrooms, the high school classrooms, and teach these kids. So it takes the industry support. Goes back to Brian's point of mentoring. It even starts at the mentoring at the high school levels. There's a couple of different high school programs that are starting to find that same model as Texas, and so I've been working with Nevada for a few years, trying to find a way to get into them. It's a long road. One of the things we did talk about from NSPS Workforce Development Committee was when you get into some of these high schools and you're starting to lay the groundwork to get into the high school levels, they want to know about career potentials. They want to know about how many positions will be available, what assets and schools, fundamentals they need to learn from a high school level that transitions. They want to know about salaries. And so we're talking about, there's not a really good, POB used to do a really good salary survey years ago. Those are gone, those kind of things. And those are some of the things that we need. And maybe Jonathan can chime in there, but some of the things that we need to go in front of the school districts with to be able to get in surveying it as part of a school district. Those are some of the things that Seneca was talking about and that they had to deal with at Texas. So
Yeah, I know here in Colorado, the big thing is if we can align curriculum with the CTE standards.
Yep.
So that's one way to kind of bridge that gap. But thinking about, I used to teach geometry, and if there's ever a course that needs a massive overhaul to real life practical experiences, it's geometry. There's so much that's taught in that course that is very practical to what y'all do, and then there's a lot of crap taught in that course that's not practical to anything that anybody does. So it'd be nice to be able to work with a state that runs with Common Core standards and create a math course that was based on surveying, civil engineering type skills. I think it could be fairly easily done, but that way you're actually using workforce development, practical skills and application in that course. And if you tie it to enough standards, kids can then earn a math credit towards doing it. So I think that would be the way that, if we were really wanted to as a group try to make some ends with that, that would be how I would recommend doing that. Is just make it a math course.
Even And you can even start early before high school. Every year, except for recently, I've been representing NCEES at student competitions like Future City competition,
Yep.
where we're asking the kids about elements in their map, like scale bars and monumentation throughout the city, and how they thinking about survey. And I've done it long enough where I've had a few parents come back and say that their now kid is gone on to college and is going to be a surveyor. So it made a difference, but more of us can volunteer our time for things like that to start as early as possible, even before high school.
Yep. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things. Is I look forward to every January is my Nevada school Future Cities competition.
There you go. Yep.
I love it.
Dan Rodman here. I
Yeah.
did a TrigStar program in a high school here. This was my first year doing it. And
nice.
So a lot of know what TrigStar is, and it's you're in the actual test, you're doing law sines, law cosines, that kind of thing. Well, in the presentation, I just showed them, a total station is, basically solving like a side angle side triangle problem. And I didn't talk about how to solve it. I talked about how surveyors think about the geometry of it. And you don't want to take a short backside and a long foresight, And then we looked at GPS is basically a distance triangle, and if your satellites are close together overhead, your horizontal is not so good. And then photogrammetry, you can basically think of as a distance between the cameras, and then two angles is basically what your collinearity equations do for, finding a point on two photos. And so if your photos are close together, that's actually good for horizontal, where in GPS it's bad. So, oh, sorry.
Oh, that was somebody's.
You're good.
Oh, okay.
Good.
Yeah. So just talking more qualitatively about the kids whoever wins the TrigStar test is going on to work at NASA or whatever, make the GPS satellites, not use GPS receivers. But, just get people excited in if they like thinking spatially like that, and the things that you don't have to know how GPS works inside, but you got to think about the quality of the result. So that was the spiel I gave at TrigStar, to just appeal to more, folks who maybe aren't so strong on law cosines, law sines, but might get there if they're motivated by, liking that kind of stuff.
One of the things we've talked about even over the last few years is we've made such a focus on math, and I saw even Jerry threw in there, but we've made it such a focus on the math students, and really we wanted to develop something more on the history side, or some of the kids in the history classes and those kind of things, and how we can develop something that would correlate history and how we can get to the survey programs and those kind of things in the surveying students. But I went to a local high school, like career technical education high school, and they brought me in to do a presentation to the CAD students. And so I had started the conversation with CAD, and then it went to we can use it for 3D modeling or the gaming kids. And so by the time I got done, I went for one class, and by the time I got done with the high school, I think I did 6 classes, because it was like, oh, we have gaming students here, and so we brought them in and we talked about how 3D modeling and certain things like that, or CADs and math and all these different ones. So you can spin the conversation so many different times. I've even spun it where the high school that I went to was all about teachers, and it was about producing teachers. And I'm like, surveying needs teachers and professors, as Knud alluded to, now the doctorate's program, and there's got a healthy doctorate program at UMaine. But I spun the conversation of, if you want to be an educator, go learn about the surveying profession and become an educator. Like in high school, you can spin so many different conversations on surveying. So one of those things. Rob, go for it.
I think one of the critical things to tell young people, whether you're in presenting a TrigStar thing or a Future City or any of those things, anytime you interact with them, is to say, this is a career where we use a lot of the things that you look at in school and say, when am I ever going to use this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of goes back to what Jim threw in the chat. He bought a new RTK unit comes with a 637-page manual, and he's using it just for clear signals in the forest. No drafting, no least squares adjustments, just plain collection of features. But nowhere in the manual did it teach me how to remove a splinter as he's walking through the forest. So that's some good stuff. There's some good stuff in the chat for those that can kind of follow along in there. Go for it, Kyle. We haven't even got to like question 2. We kind of
Can I jump in? I
yeah,
think
go for it.
I think so. Stephen just kind of nailed it there in the chat. Like,
Exactly.
There are, and I think this just goes back to exposure, showing kids how accessible surveying is, that this is one of those careers where you do not have to dive into a 4-year degree to get started, but you have the opportunity to work all the way through a PhD program.
Yep.
And I think that that's the part that I see that is really missing. And I don't know, I'm in a rural community. So, you know, when we see things like that, I've got a lot of kids that we have a very active and robust trail system here, trail builders and things like that. And they talk about that trail building stuff, but I don't think there's ever that, what is the relationship between those things that you like to do on the weekends and you do every day to this potential career? And I think that is something that I know I want to work with some of our local groups on really highlighting, is that this could be not only a very profitable and an in-demand career, it's got a lot of cool aspects to it as well.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's, you know, nobody ever gets it. And that's why when I do my high school presentations, I always offer the kids to come in and job shadow or you know, summer intern, those kind of things. Cause so they don't know about a particular profession or a career until they get their hands on it. So they're making these decisions, you know, at 13 years old because they're in 8th grade and have to pick a high school that's in line with their CTE programs. Yeah. Kyle, go for it.
So kind of in line with that, you know, Trent, you're going into all these high schools and, you know, you guys are working with the students trying to get in there. Apparently Texas has a good program. Is there a framework that other states could follow? You know, if we break it down even to a state by state basis, is there something like a program or someone I could approach and say, hey, we want to do this in California also?
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. There's a couple of that really spearheaded it in Texas, Desiree Hurst, and then Seneca Holland, and a few the TSPS board members and stuff that were kind of at the time. They really spearheaded and worked through it. And I've had multiple meetings with them and tried to get that same format. And they're willing to share everything we can. So if anybody who watches this later as well, you know, reach out anytime. We can get you in contact with the ones who kind of set it up and move them forward. So there is something that's what I try to preach even at workforce development is there's so many resources out there that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that's the most important part, is not reinventing the wheel. Something's worked for somebody already. And we're seeing results out of it. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. So yeah.
Brent, this is Tim Mack here.
Yeah.
One thing I haven't heard of is health. You know, I'm a 71-year-old out surveying, and you know, nobody ever explained skin cancer to me when coming up through the years. And this is one thing that the field people will face, is skin cancer. And the gentleman I work with, he's licensed, 76 years old, and he's got skin cancer too. He's always having it removed.
Right.
So I think, you know, we need to teach these youngsters that they need to wear the protective clothing, and they need to, you know, make sure that they're covered, especially being in the desert where you are.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that was probably, you know, that's curriculum with inside the safety aspect of it, I think, right? So it's part of that PPE and the safety aspect of it, I think, goes with the health as well. So Jason, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, I was going to carry on with the whole process of schooling, as it looks like there's a lot of surveyors on here and some LSATs. I don't know how many field people are on here. So
yeah,
I'm in the process of having these discussions with the local chapters, and the whole continuing education thing has come to the foreground because there's a bunch of people that don't think they need it. There's a bunch of people that think we need it. It's not a big discussion to have here, but ultimately knowing what you need to do to get to the next level has been hard, because this disconnect where it sounds, all roses and fun and games, but get kids involved. There's a lot of hard work that goes into being a surveyor or a survey tech. And I think that that's disconnected because so many people just want to get the work done. And that disables you from actually going forward with the progress to learning. Because I know when I first started, I came in with a college degree and decades of experience. I was carrying a lath bag around with like 10 T-posts in it because the guy wanted me to pay my dues. And I was like, yeah, thanks. I appreciate that because I need that kind of input. So part of it's self-induced. I think there's a lot of room for improvement on that. And I lost the other part of what I was going to talk about there because I was listening to Tim on the safety thing. We have a lot of issues internally where, again, this is a meeting of a bunch of people. I'm on my way to license, but I've had to struggle through the process of not getting a lot of support through the companies that I've worked for. Safety being one of the reasons I've quit one of my jobs. Other reasons because of incongruencies with the people I worked with, but I let nothing get in my way. I literally stopped working one place to go somewhere else to get to license because that was my only goal. But ultimately, I got taught how to tie nails. I got taught how to dig and look for things. And those things aren't being taught in the university programs because I've worked with plenty of surveyors that have graduated with a 4-year degree and 6 months of experience with a PLS, and they can't find their ass with 2 hands. And I think there's a lot of room to expand across both disciplines. Sorry, I'll be very frank. I see Tim's laughing in the background. I can hear you laughing, Tim. Trust me, I'm laughing with you.
Yeah.
I think what you just touched. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it, Brian. Go for it.
I think what you just touched on is it's kind of a bigger problem. Is we are all focused on getting more people into the profession, but we're not focused on what do we do and what support do we provide those who are already in the profession and how to help get them get what they need to progress and stay surveyors and not go somewhere else.
And that's what I talk a lot about is the culture. And I think we're at a kind of on the downhill to changing some of the old guard and the seasoned guys is starting to, those school of hard knocks type things will, I think, eventually start to weed themselves out in the next 5 to 7 years, I think, as we start to change some culture, but it's a cultural aspect when it comes to the profession. And so, as we bring more women into surveying, that will change the culture as well. Obviously some of we talk about the truck talk won't be allowed, won't be able to become office, conversations anymore, that kind of stuff. I think that cultural aspect of it will change, but we have a 5 to 7 year window, I think, before some of this really starts to change. So, but go for it, Jerry.
Well, the nice thing about the profession is the richness of all the problems that we have.
Yeah.
The theme of tonight was the educational program. The recruiting and all that kind of stuff's a whole nother issue.
Yeah, it is.
And the placement afterwards, another thing that there's all sorts of stuff. And that's what I'm saying is which part of the elephant do you want to try to describe? So I think we're kind of wandering a bit here, and
I was just about to get one of the questions back. Yeah.
back on track here a little bit. Otherwise, we'll never get off of it.
Yeah. That's why I jokingly said this will be at least a 2-hour conversation.
But there are some things that are brought up that I think kind of loop back into that. And part of what Brian was saying and Tim was saying is and this ties into one of the questions that we have in our apprenticeship and mentorship and that type of thing. And I think that's an important aspect of the educational program, whether we're talking technical or professional, whatever it is, get them working as soon as possible. We always tried to, at the end of that first year and that 2-year program, to get them placed in the summer with an engineering or a surveying firm to kind of reinforce what we were doing in class, but also to find out what it is they did and they didn't like about the profession, that type of thing. And that's advantageous not just to the student and then the education that student is going through, but also to the employer, because they see a potential future person that they're going to hire. A lot of them would keep the student on during that second year or whatever, and would make them a job offer. So it's a two-sided thing. So I think that the sooner we can get them out into the field, working with someone, applying what they're learning, it reinforces what's going in class, and they become better learners when they come back, because now they've made the connection and they can see how the stuff ties together.
More engaged.
Yes, and becomes part of the educational process. People like to think of this as, well, there's the education part, there's the experience part, there's the examination part. It's all related. It's all related. You can't excel in one and not in any of the others. They all work together.
We're going to add a fourth E, and that's engaged. Keep them engaged. So do we want to kind of continue on that? What role but the particular question that Jerry said was, what role should apprentice mentorship or field work play in formal education? Is our current structure doing enough? And I think that's kind of what Jerry was going down the path on. But
I would like to
go for it, Knud. Go for it, Knud.
I just, my thought is, as long as licensure requires experience, this should be integrated with summer employment or after graduation. That's all I need to say.
Yeah.
I think it's incredibly important to have that knowledge of how to do, what are they asking somebody in the field to do? So if you're in the office, you should still have that field experience. I think it's necessary to continue on with at least how we're doing it now. I'm finding that students that are coming out of colleges right now have adequate field experience and have a good understanding of, at least what a total station is and what we're doing out with it. But I think it's important for them to get out there and be on a few projects so you know what you're actually asking them to do in the field when you're expecting precision and in elements that are not always very easy to do.
Who else? I just threw in the chat. So Knud's at the UMaine. He's got tons and tons of articles that he's written, but he had a whole series, 15 different articles on thoughts on professional practice and education. So we've been running them as far as there's lots of different state publications that have been running them as well. But Knud's done an amazing job of kind of highlighting through 15 different articles on this exact topic that we're talking about. So
just Dan Rodman here, just a thought about what, education can cover that maybe mentorship can't, is some of the new technical stuff that isn't out there with the mentors. Like, who out in practice knows anything about the coming 2022 coordinate systems?
Right.
Or who out there in practice really knows what happens when you do a GNSS site calibration? What kind of math is going on in there? And the site calibration part of it isn't hard math, but do they even know? And so you hit that kind of thing in school. That's the kind of thing that, school is most important for. And like Knud was saying, then the practical knowledge, that's you apprentice to pick up a lot of the rest.
Yeah, nice. Here's another good one in there. So how, kind of piggybacking a little bit on that, how should education balance traditional field methods with emerging tech like drones, scanning, AI, those kind of things? And so I will say, some particular licensing boards, they say there's no rules for tools, right? And so that kind of goes into that aspect of whether somebody's using a drone or using scanners and those kind of things, right? I mean, that's happening every day within the BIM environment. So how can the education balance traditional field methods?
Trent,
yeah.
My take on that is listen to the employers. Usually a well-rounded and well-represented advisory committee composed of employers that hire graduates, maybe a board member, practitioners from both private and public, some equipment suppliers, definitely officers of professional societies and supporters. You get them on a good advisory committee and they just give you the direction and what they want and what they need.
That's a great point. Yeah, I'm on our advisory board as well for Great Basin here. So yeah, that's a great point to get the input, industry input. So
I would, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say real quick, as far as emerging technology, I'm sure that most companies out there are kind of similar to ours, where we have our own workflows and how we do things, and very specific. And probably as emerging technology comes out, these companies are going to have very specific workflows, and they're probably all going to be different. So I think just providing some sort of teaching as to like what that technology can do is probably the most important thing, and then not so much like, you know, going into detailed workflows, because each company is going to be different. As far as on the education side, that's kind of my thought.
Yeah. Dan, you're gonna add?
Yeah. And Dan Rodman here. You know, these tools are changing fast too. So whatever you teach them now might be irrelevant in a year. You know, it's an oversimplification probably, but when I think about our third surveying class, what I really hit them on is what a surveyor can do that you know, a police officer with a scanner and Trimble Connect or whatever, or an architect, you know, with a, you know, that can push the same buttons that we can push. They can't set control networks, and they cannot solve property boundaries. And so that's the stuff I hit quite a bit. And so, you know, that we're on levels and robots and GNSS and looking at property boundary solutions. And, you know, and that means I'm not covering scanners, and we do a week on photogrammetry, but I'm really not doing a whole lot in there. You know, they do a bundle of 4 photos and make a model and an orthophoto, but yeah, just, you know, we gotta stay with what gets you your license.
And that brings up a great point. And then I always wondered, from the educator's side of things, how many that actually went through the education were never interested in becoming a licensed surveyor. They just went through the formal education aspect of it. Jerry, yeah, Jerry's raising his hand already. But I just wonder, you know, we make this correlation that everybody has to become licensed. Not every person ever wants to become licensed. They don't want that responsibility. They don't want those things. But I wonder, from an education standpoint or educators aspect of it, how many, you know, if there's 100 students, is there 1, 5, 10 that never want to become licensed? They're just coming to better themselves within the profession and never want that experience or that responsible charge. Any thoughts on that? Go for it, Knud.
That's how it's sold, because right now, for the most part, everybody kind of gets the idea, at least coming through the schools and stuff, that you're going to get ultimately licensed as a land surveyor. You know, and when we go back to looking at making the analogy with the civil engineers and stuff, for every civil engineer that's out there, you typically need anywhere from 3 to 5 technicians to support that surveyor.
Yeah.
Support that engineer with all the other stuff that's got to happen, working as part of a team. And in surveying, it's relatively similar. I mean, not everybody has to be a licensed land surveyor.
Right.
Shouldn't be the goal. That's your manager or that type of the guy side. But you need a lot of people to support that person. So I think we need to have the CST emphasis and you know, saying that this is a viable profession. I mean, you can make the jump to the professional ranks with additional education, experience, or whatever, but it's perfectly fine to stop and be a technician. I mean, or you know, a technologist, or whatever you want to call it.
But if that's our goal, we're not going to end up with enough licensed people. I think you gotta shoot for, you know, encouraging a lot more people, you know, and teaching them about that, encouraging them to do it, and then you'll end up with less than, you know, you might hope you would, and still that's not going to be enough.
Licensed people, do you really need? That's the point. Is not everybody. Does everybody have to be licensed? How many do we really?
No, but you don't know who is gonna, and so we've got to teach this stuff and we've got to emphasize it in the education. So I'm not going to teach down and just like pick the people that only need to know how to, you know, take out a GPS receiver and they don't even have to level it anymore. They just have to turn it on and start pushing buttons.
Yeah, I was gonna say to that. So one of the things I do preach as well is responsible charge when it comes to that. So our firm, we're a staff of 35 and we have 9 LSs. I try to stay, I just hired a couple new people now, but we try to stay to that 1-to-4 ratio when it comes to that. There's other business models, more so construction companies that do nothing but construction staking. They're 2 LSs to 50 bodies, right? How are you staying in responsible charge? But they're not doing the boundary resolutions and those kind of things as well. So I know Knud kind of wanted to chime in there. I didn't want to cut him off on that.
The foreign students definitely don't have any But I will say this, our model at the University of Maine is you have to take the FS exam to graduate. You have to.
Yep.
We are training for one purpose, to provide licensed surveyors for the profession. That's it. Not everybody gets licensed, but 90% of them do.
Yeah, that's perfect. On that, before I go to you, Kyle, really quick. So the CST talk as well. So a lot of the high school presentations that we're doing now, high school counselors and teachers want you to talk about the non degree paths to surveying as well, or to our career as well, because there's that kind of that shift, the pendulum shift of no longer pushing for the education and going more to the trades and those kind of things as well. So high school presentations are asking you for non-traditional education paths into the profession. So those conversations are being had, and that's where that CST really comes in great, that we can take the CST and say, as a high school level, you don't have to get a degree. Here's CST level 1 through 4. You can show your current employer that you're invested in the profession and that kind of stuff. So those conversations are happening at the high school level as well. So for some reason we keep losing people. I don't know why. We're down to 23, but we were up to 28 there for a minute. Go for it, Kyle.
You're scaring them off.
I guess so.
I might scare even more off with this comment, but it might be a little heretical, but I more and more feel like that the surveying license is so all-encompassing that it causes more problems. Because I, as a licensed land surveyor, am not necessarily an expert in every single subset, and I'm supposed to practice within those subsets, but I'm also supposed to be in charge of people who are doing those things potentially. And so why is it that we have licenses that cover everything, including in some cases trying to cover, GIS and photogrammetry, when I might not be an expert on those things? Could we have a, package of licenses, so I could say, yeah, I got my GIS license, I got my boundary license, I got my construction license, and I'm working on my, LiDAR license, and I'm a licensed land surveyor, but I've got 4 out of 7 of these qualifications. I'm not qualified to work in the PLSS, so I'm not doing that yet, but I'm working on it.
So we've had these conversations at Nevada conference. There is something in the works within CWS called the Mapping and Science path to licensure as well. It will be similar to what was in. It hasn't. It's just an ad hoc committee. Conversations are happening right now. It may or may not become a motion coming up at this summer at the fall meeting. The annual meetings, but they are looking at those particular things because somebody who's doing hydrographic surveying, why do they have to understand the full PLSS system, those kind of things, right? So there's being conversations had on the NC's level of a mapping and science degree. But in some aspects of that, it's the twofold situation where we're creating extra barriers to entry, because now to do the same job we're doing today is going to take us 5 exams, right? You're going to have to take your FS exam, your PS exam, your PLSS module, because we're in the West. And you're going to have to take your mapping and science exam because you want to practice topographic surveys. And then you're going to have to take your state specific exam because you want to practice in said state. And so now there's going to be 5 licensing exams. We do the same exact thing we're doing today. So it's a double-edged sword for sure. And those
I'm just trying to tell more tests.
Yeah, exactly. But those conversations will be happening in the next, 5 years or less. And those conversations are happening at NCAAS already. So, Jason, I know you had your hand up. I didn't want to lose that thought. So,
No, it's okay. I was writing some stuff down because I got to loop back to where I forgot it earlier. And Kyle, you're not a heretic for saying that. It's a good process. The thing I escaped coming through and getting into survey from where I came from was pre-med and medical. I'm the only person in my family who didn't go medical. And what you were asking about was, why can't we have all these licenses? Well, the difference between a medical doctor and a nurse practitioner and a PA and that whole realm is because they all know a lot of the same stuff, but a medical doctor and the rigor that they have to go through is so much deeper and so much more broad that the decisions that they have to make clearly go way beyond the capabilities of anyone else. Now, someone else that's a nurse practitioner or a PA may actually have an expertise that a doctor might not have. However, The doctor has the basis of knowledge to start with. So in your idea of having multiple licenses, maybe having one license and have specialties in each one is giving the option of having this depth of knowledge to give you more opportunities. Because if someone just goes out and does topos, I mean, this discussion is on the hot topic button for a lot of state boards and state polices. We were talking about this the other day. I sat in the state board meeting and made my comments known because I've got some questions on it, even though I'm not licensed yet, but on the way. But where does the geodesist need a license? Like where does the geodesy license come in? Because you want to measure something, and like, what about the metrologist? I mean, that's where it kind of gets like, do you need a license to do that? Or do you want to benefit from the license that basically everyone in the survey community has? Because doctors were kind of the standard of what's going on. Nurse practitioners, PAs, nurse anesthetists, they can practice sometimes independently in other states, but sometimes they also have to have the connection with the physician because that physician does have that extra knowledge. So your idea is good. It's founded. I think it's a good topic that you and I are going to still talk about. I'm still working on that discussion sometime in the future. But my other part was in the professions, the trades, plumbers need 8,000 hours, roughly 4 years of work. Electricians need 8,000 hours. And these are quantifiable things. A PE needs to work for 4 years before they can sit for the PE. We have kind of a mishmash of a bunch of different things. And I brought this up with my board recently, and I said, what does a percentage of my hours mean? Because I mean, that's a ridiculous measure of how you quantify what your skill set is. Because if I'm working a full-time job, do I have time to sit down and go, what percentage of my day was spent doing boundary analysis? What percentage of my day was spent actually doing field operations for setting a pin in a witness corner? What part of my percentage of my day was actually doing client contact? And that's got to stop. And that's where I've been, because I came from this in a whole different genre of where I was in computer science and stuff. I thought, how come it's not so quantifiable for us? It should be just as easy as everyone else, but it seems like across the board we have this morass of all these different ways to do it. Well, you have to have a number of years, you have to have a college degree and a number of years, but we don't have like a quantifiable number. And it seems as ironic as it is, we use math to the nth degree and have to take calculus and linear algebra and use it and utilize it, but we can't come up with a simple set of numbers that gives us a quantifiable goal to shoot for. So there's my soapbox.
That's awesome. And it is, you know, it's a great analogy on how to kind of quantify that, right? Like as a field guy, how many hours of windshield time did you have from job to job, right? In your, you know, I worked for so many years, but so many of that was windshield time, those kind of things. But good stuff.
Dan Rodman here. I would just
Yeah.
summarize by saying we've got to protect licensure for doing property boundaries.
Yep.
You know, and geospatial technology is everywhere and everyone's using it. And we're kidding ourselves if we think we're going to make a Uber license system for everybody doing every kind of geospatial technology. You know, it's growing too fast, and, you know, and it's just everywhere. So protect licensure for property boundary surveying and just focus on that. And focus on that in our teaching, because if we don't turn out enough people who are going out and getting their licenses, then, you know, then that's a problem.
Yeah, we hit that cliff. Yep. One of the, going back to that mapping and science thing, so one of the backgrounds that they've kind of pushed on that is initially when the engineering, you know, there was just an engineer license. It didn't specify the disciplines, right? So now there's a civil engineer, there's a structural engineer, electrical, mechanical, all those different things. Initially, when the licensure just came out, it was an engineer. So now they're kind of using that same piggyback model of the engineering aspect of it to mirror when it comes to surveying. So kind of like Kyle alluded to and Jason alluded to, there'll be different disciplines probably within, you know, before I leave the profession. I know that. So it'll be interesting on that. But just to keep kind of moving along in the next question, and I think this is an important one, especially even Jonathan kind of saying he's in a rural area. How do we keep surveying education flexible enough to serve urban, rural, public, and private sectors equally well? And I think, I mean, now, I mean, Knud could probably do this, right? He already said it's all programs are online. Great Basin College is online, so that online platform is there. And then with like Great Basin College, you just team up with a local mentor to help you with your field exercises and the training, the equipment aspects of it, and all those different things when it comes to that aspect of it. So I feel like I feel like that part of the education thing has been solved. I think at least over the last, Great Basin College has been doing it since 2006. We've gone online, so it's been happening for the last almost 20 years already at this point. So anyway.
Like the problems with current is just there's a lot of classes that are required in some of these programs that aren't available except for during work hours, which makes it difficult even then for people to do.
Good point. Jim threw in the chat that he went to night school for 6 years, 4 nights a week. So it's been done in the past, but Jerry.
One of the things that work really well at the tech schools is more flexible with respect to formats and response to education and that type of thing. If you put it in the university system, there's so much over that you have to deal with that sometimes you can't change things. But I know that when I was still at MATC before Dan came along, we went to an 8-week format on a lot of courses so that we can take and emphasize a particular class more heavily over a shorter period, and the students are taking fewer classes at a time. But you could also update the courses. Dan has changed a lot of stuff tremendously since I was there in a relatively short amount of time, and he's got more freedom to do that in that type of environment than you do with some of the larger programs. So sometimes keeping it local, in a community college or a technical college, it is an easier way to do that kind of stuff, and is can react more quickly to what the needs are. That's part of the reason the technical colleges are set up, are to serve the economic needs for that particular district and that type of thing. So we're supposed to be, very quickly reacting to what the employer needs are.
I think this one, I was going to say, Corey, I just say unmute. I was going to say, I think this one works well with Corey too, because we kind of had the whole weekend situation for the tech track stuff. So maybe you can kind of chime in a little bit on that, Corey.
Absolutely. So one of our, the biggest thing that we have, or I should say one of our niches here, is that we have the weekend land survey program where students do most of the work online, except about once a month they come down to campus and do all the stuff with the rest of the lab, with the rest of the group, and do all the hands-on work. So we found that it's a pretty good mix of the hands-on plus being able to be adaptive. That way they're not here Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 10 o'clock. They can be here on the weekends. And yeah, it sucks getting time away from the family and everything else, but we found it works pretty well to work with that. I guess I'm curious though, as keeping everything at the community college, you're right. We can move stuff a little bit quicker. We have the opportunity to change a little bit faster than we often do at the universities. So it does work well. The one, I guess, caveat to that though is at a 2-year college like we're at right now, we have to move so quickly that I'm concerned that we are leaving stuff out. And I guess that's one of the biggest things I want to take away from this whole discussion is I realize, and you said, advisory boards and everything, we lean on ours, absolutely. But I want to hear from the other employers. What are you looking for, right? That's the biggest thing that I'm constantly asking. What are you looking for, and make sure that we're giving everything there. Use the equipment, learning how to know stuff, learning how to find answers, 100%. But are there any technical things that we can do or that you're not seeing?
Brian, you want to chime in there?
No, I just think that a lot of us probably have, I could probably brainstorm 50 things right now I'd like to convey to you that I think are important to us as, but we all just need to be, talk about it, and Corey, feel free to reach out to me and I'll give you, my thoughts on that. But I think that's what it's going to take, is just talking about those things and what matters to us, what's important and what's not.
And that goes, it's kind of one of the things I wanted to bring up somehow, and Corey brought it up. I think perfect timing of that is the curriculum is so fast, and in a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree, how many hours of just survey curriculum only is someone learning, right? In 4 years, it might be 2, 3, 4, if you're lucky, a couple hundred hours worth of surveying in that 4-year window, right? As opposed to on-the-job training where it's 2,000 hours a year and those kind of things, where it's only hundreds of hours throughout a degree program. And so to Corey's point, has how fast the curriculum has to be taught. And we've kind of talked about it, you're only talking about it one time and then you're tested on it, 2 weeks later, and then you've moved on to a whole nother section. And so you're never building that repetition to build the memory and the bank and all that kind of stuff to understand that stuff. So, and I don't know how, there's no way to change that. I mean, there's no way to change the academic aspect of it when it comes to that. So I don't know, how we change some of that. So like that kind of, anybody else gonna chime in on that? Because I was gonna say it kind of leads into the next question is biggest obstacles in education. So that kind of rolls right into some of that stuff. So
I think as far as obstacles, I think that more programs need to have better access to like CAD and MicroStation, and be able to get the programs that we use, on a day-to-day basis, not just straight up AutoCAD and like, you hire somebody, yeah, I know AutoCAD. Well, AutoCAD, you don't know Civil 3D, or at least the parts of Civil 3D that we care about. But being able to get, programs to have more access to software would be great too.
Yeah.
Ken,
yeah, go for it.
I'm going to talk on it at a more in-house level. I am very disappointed that so many surveying programs demand that faculty have a PhD but don't require a PS license.
Right.
I just think this is just not good for faculty not to have that PS license. These universities require faculty spend so much time on research and research grants rather than focusing on practice. And the universities also demand course topics that require students to take courses that take up credits without necessarily adding to make a good practitioner. And you can say, well, humanities, but let me just give you an example. Like at the University of Maine, you have to have 3 credits of artistic expression. And so a lot of students take music appreciation. Really? They're on their damn iPods all day long. They don't need a 3-credit course on music appreciation. Right. So it looks good when the university categorizes it like, arts appreciation or diversity and equity stuff. But then you look at the courses that actually they can take that will pass it. You just want to gag. And it just chews up so many credit hours that could be spent for more practical courses. Anyway, so that's my take from up high in the faculty. Done.
We did talk about it in SPS Education Committee about how flourishing the doctorate program is at UMaine to create those educators that we need to fill these positions. And so I was happy to hear that conversation, because it's always been a question of who's gonna teach the students after we lose all the educators. So I'm happy that UMaine is doing so great there. So
hey, Trent, one of the
go for it, Rob.
One of the comments in the chat was a guy that's working full time, and he's only 20 miles away from a college that offers the program, but all the classes are in the middle of the day. So here he is working, and he has to go to an out-of-state, either an asynchronous or an evenings classes or whatever, to get the classes he needs to advance.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point there, Rob, too. So I know, now you've got a program so close to the house, but you can't get there during the day. So now you've got to enroll in a UMaine or, a New Mexico State or any of the programs that are online, Great Basin College, whatever it may be. But now you're having to pay those particular in-state tuitions, right? Or out-of-state tuitions as opposed to the in-state tuition. So there's the added burden to the cost of the education aspect of it. Not to toot their horns, but Idaho State, they have allowed for anyone enrolled in the program in-state or out-of-state to have in-state tuition. So they've been able to, kind of curve some of that aspect of it, that barrier a little bit. So that's great. So those are, I guess, some of the things that keeping the education flexible, right? Back to the main question was how to keep it flexible. And so working with universities or technical colleges that have online programs that will allow in-state tuition for anybody across the country, because that's going to be granted, and I'm on an education foundation, and some of us others are on education foundations, and so there's scholarships available, and not every year do scholarships get awarded, and so there's always that aspect of it too. So make sure you're reaching out to either NSPS; they have a great scholarship program as well, and your local state societies have tons of scholarships available. So making sure that if you're in a program, to make sure that you reach out and you're enrolled in that. So
I think
go for it.
I think accessibility at all levels is an issue with not just surveying. We run across this in a number of the workforce development issues we have, whether it be a hospital or anything like that. It's just you want to get kids introduced to this field, but you also want to make sure that the person introducing them has some, background and a little bit of a clue about what they're talking about to introduce that. And then that kind of goes back to the earlier part of the conversation that we had with, introducing the certificate programs to the high school level as opposed to automatically doing the 4-year degrees and so on. Is more and more of those kids have started to figure out that maybe instead of enrolling in a 4-year college and wasting 3 years on a degree that I'm not really sure of what I want to do, that these certificates are a great teaser to that. They're relatively low. They're relatively low risk, and they can provide a working opportunity fairly quickly. And then I could work towards, getting those degrees or different advanced certifications along the way. So, this is a problem that we see in a number of different fields, and it's especially in this rural area that I'm in. Our high school principal that I talked to today said, I have money that if we could get someone that has the credentials to come in and teach one class a day, that, we could pay them to do that. The problem is we don't have that one person in the community because we're dying for the people that we have. So it's just trying to find that right mix for both your community locally and globally is really, really difficult.
And I have some to add to that.
Please.
And I speak at the university for the University of Maine, but we really encourage students, if they want to save money, to go to a 2-year surveying program. And in fact, I went to a 2-year program because I didn't think I wanted to go on. And so we accept almost all the credits. It's been so crazy that we've had students that come from a 2-year surveying program that don't take a single surveying course at the University of Maine because they fill out on the other, and they've had all their surveying courses at the community college. And we also have a program where we will teach a college credit course at a high school, which is going on with what Jonathan was saying, where the students, they can take this one credit course and they'll be given a college credit for it by taking it at high school. So we do, at least one of our faculty does offer that. That's it.
Nice. So one of the things Corey threw in there is, how does the role of VR have with keeping it flexible? And that'd be interesting, I guess, when a VR aspect. So 2 things I threw in the chat was, we've been working on behalf of NSPS, we've been working on a VR headset that shows the day in the life of the career, so that we can use that for, which you probably, have you seen it, Corey? I would hope you've seen it no, you haven't? At a Murphy hasn't even showed you yet? Okay, so there's 2 things in there that I threw in the chat. So Career XR, we have a day in the life video that was shot with 360 cameras. And so you put the immersive headsets on, take it to the high school presentations. You could use it for Parkland's, outreach, people going and just finding students. You can use it for that. So throw it on. There's a 7-minute video, there's 3-minute video, and a 1-minute video. So we just rolled it out in January. Been trying to really kind of push it and sell the aspect of getting it in the hands of state societies, and that kind of stuff. So I threw in their Career XR. They're based out of North Dakota. They have 96 day in the life careers outside of just surveying as alone. They have all kinds of different things on there. So I threw that website in there. You guys can check it out. If you want to find out more about that, reach out to me and I can get you in contact. And then the other thing that we've done is there's a virtual experience. So there was 11 different scene video shot, and that has been turned into a virtual experience or online platform. And that's what I threw in the chat there as well. That is on the Be a Surveyor website. NCWS helped monetarily with the funds to be able to create that. So they've been a huge supporter of surveying outreach when it comes to that stuff. So, but back to the main question of VR and how we can use that from a training aspect, I think will be interesting on how to be able to, how do you teach somebody to set up a gun, or how do you teach them to use a data collector, or how do you teach them to run AutoCAD, land desktop, those kind of things, or Civil 3D, sorry. How do you do that in a VR headset? I think will be interesting. So I don't know how, I'm sure it will play a role for those that, Brian, the Future Cities is rolling into the high school program is using the VR headsets now for the Future City High School program. And so that's cool. So I think the VR headset's going to really start to take off, but training with it on the survey level, I think is going to be a different story and maybe a little bit more challenging. I feel like it's coming.
And Rodman here, you got to get your hands on that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know, centering and leveling a tri-brac.
Agreed.
Yeah, got to put your hands on it. But I was just going to say, in terms of challenges of teaching students, more and more of my students are really working, 20, 30-hour jobs, and they're doing this 2-year tech degree, and you just can't do it all. And that's a lot of where my sort of cynicism comes with, you've got to focus, you've got to hit the basics over and over and over. And people who think we should add safety and and all these other ancillary things that are nice and make a well-rounded professional, just these students are coming to us with even less time, and they're expecting to get everything done just at school, and then so they can work their 30-hour a week job. And it's a challenge just trying to get the basics in and get their attention, along with the distractions of modern society that are a whole lot worse, now than 15 years ago.
Well, that, I know, especially in surveying, it's not a traditional student. I guess that'd be an interesting, maybe you could allude to that, or Corey, but what would you say the average age of your student? It's a traditional, like a working adult, right? Which is, surveying is found as a second profession. So I would imagine it's not your traditional 18 to 22-year-old in the program, right?
No, we've got very few 18 to 22-year-olds anymore. I'd say our average age is probably 27 to 32, even up there.
Yeah.
And then I've got a student who's 50 years old, wants to come back and do it.
Yeah. We just started our program in Las Vegas, Butts and Seats program, but the gentleman, we have one student in the program, and we've been working on it the last 4 years, but we have one student in the program, and he retired from the Postal Service after 40 years. So he is not your traditional student as well, right? So
it's good to support them, but at the same time, I mean, you need to commit hours to learn this stuff, and that's hard if you're working, and more power to them, and they've got obligations and expenses and everything, but there are just limitations to quote trying to do it all. So
we had one last question on here. If you guys are still good for another 15-ish minutes or so, but this was kind of a little bit of a loaded question as well. But how can schools or licensing bodies better integrate professional ethics, communication, and real world decision making? It's kind of that's like the grenade and walk out, right, on that particular question. So
can you repeat that, Trent? Sorry. For a second.
How can schools or licensing bodies integrate professional ethics, communication, and real world decision making? So I would say we'll probably, because this whole thing's based on education, so I would say how we, spin the conversation based on education programs that would relate to professional ethics, communication, and real world decision making. So Jerry's ready to go.
Well, I've always got a comment or two.
I know, I love it.
There are three parts to this whole process. There's the education, there's the professional practice, and then there's also the licensing. aspect of it. And I think all three of those need to work in better harmony than they currently are. Because what's happening in practice isn't necessarily what's being reflected on the licensing exams. Yet if you look at what the licensing exam requirements are for the knowledge areas and stuff like that, there's a lot of stuff on there that's questionable whether it should be there or not anymore. And that to a certain extent affects the education model that we have to work with. Knud mentioned that their students have to pass the FS exam, as part of the requirement for graduating from the University of Maine. Well, that means they have to answer some obsolete stuff that doesn't apply anymore, or really isn't reflected in practice anymore. So I think when we get into this stuff, the ethics, the safety, and all this kind of stuff, how it can be better integrated, I think it has to be integrated, but it has to be across the board. It has to reflect better what's going on out in industry as to what should be in education or what should be as part of the licensing exam. But the problem is that licensing exam is the aircraft carrier that you're trying to turn around. And that's really, really tough to do. I've had some interaction with the board and stuff like that, some of those things, but it is a tough thing to do. It's a tough nut to crack. My two.
Trent, I will say that I think one of the best ways is, and I know I've harped on this, is to make sure faculty are licensed, experienced surveyors.
Yeah.
When they bring that experience into the classroom, they can integrate it. I just see so many faculty from foreign nations, PhD, probably great remote sensors come in, and they have no concept of surveying in the United States and our ethical codes. Well, if you have a licensed professional surveyor that's a faculty member, they have to comply with at least their state ethics. They have to be familiar with that and so on. So that's my biggest push, is to get practical, experienced faculty in the classroom.
Yeah. Provides that real world decision-making aspect, right? They've already been there, done that type of thing.
And you've mentioned this, but there was pressure I heard, I think before my hire, they were really questioning our program. Why do you need a professional engineer teaching the civil tech part? Why do you need a licensed professional surveyor teaching beginning land surveying stuff? Can't we broaden the applicant pool, and find someone cheaper by not, the pressure's there. on the education side.
Yeah, good stuff. One of the other ones that so two things. One, I just have to say it because Knud put it in there in the chat, but Knud had one student who had to miss an exam because he was on a combat mission in Iraq and he was a Marine fighter pilot. So that was I also had I think during one of our conversations at the roundtable at our Nevada conference it was Byron, and he said the student would turn in the homework and it was always dirty and it